welcome back. So today we continue in Philippians and we are in chapter 4 verses 8 and 9. And it says, "Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue and if there be any praise, think on these things. Those things which ye have both learned and received and heard and seen in me, do, and the God of peace shall be with you." So, what are you thinking about? What are those thoughts that pop into your head over and over again? Those thoughts that cause us to fear, those thoughts that cause us anxiety or anger or hurt or bitterness, those thoughts that bring us sadness or worry. We have so many thoughts that pop into our mind throughout a day, throughout a week. And there are times we have the same thought that pops into our head. And the thing is, when a thought pops in our head, we tend to dwell on it, to think on it and ponder on it. And before you know it, we are spiraling out of control. We've let that thought take root and we are immediately going to the worst case scenario. We're letting it control us. We're letting it ruin our lives or ruin our day. We're letting it take over. And Paul is telling us here and encouraging us to think on these things, to think on whatever's true, whatever's honest, whatever's just, pure, lovely, or of a good report, if there be any virtue or any praise, think on these things. And what we need to start looking at is changing our thought pattern. When we have those negative thoughts, when we have the fears that creep into our minds, the anxiety, the hurt, the anger, whatever it is that, you're going to wake up in the middle of the night and it's going to pop in your head and you're going to stay awake the rest of the night because you're going to worry about it. You're going to ponder over it. You're going to dwell on it. And, I've told y'all before, I do those things. And I'm not supposed to. And there have been times in the past where I would wake up in the middle of the night and a thought comes into my mind and I just run with it and it just goes on and I get more worried or more scared or whatever the action is that is taking place. That's what my mind dwells on and it just keeps on going. And so I have learned that in studying Philippians and studying God's Word that, in Timothy it tells us, I have not given you a spirit of fear, but of love and of power and of a sound mind. And I had to realize those fears that would pop into my mind, those doubts, whatever it was, I had to realize that, God didn't put that there. He didn't give me a spirit of fear. And so that thought that has popped into my mind and now I am scared, I am fearful, I am worrying, God didn't put that there. And so when I began to recognize that and know that, God didn't put that there, so who did? Where did that come from? It came from the enemy. It came from Satan. Because he's going to prey on our weaknesses. He is going to use whatever he can to take our mind and our focus off of Christ. It just makes me so mad that I have lived long enough that I've only recognized that in the past year or so that, God didn't put that there. That's not of God. And that Satan is the one that has put that there, and then I get mad at him, and then, but when I would wake up after I learned these things, when I would wake up in the middle of the night, I would just start praying. And I would just pray, and I would praise, and pretty soon I was falling back asleep. And So I had to retrain my brain. I had to retrain my thought process and turn those negatives into positives and allow God to fill me with these things, fill me with thoughts of Him, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is pure, whatever. Think on these things. And I think about Paul writing these things, and he's writing these things from prison, so he's not in the best of circumstances. I think of him being stoned, being beaten, the shipwrecks, everything that he went through, and he is challenging the church and telling them, think on these things. Focus our minds on things above, not on things on the earth. And he was in a situation where his mind could have went a totally different way. It could have went towards anger and bitterness. It could have went towards hopelessness. I mean, he was doing what God had called him to do. So he could have easily latched onto those negatives and ran with them and caused him to stumble, caused him to fail, caused him to fall away from Christ. And here he is in the difficult situation that he's in, and he's encouraging the church and us to think on these things. We tend to, like I said, we let our minds go to that worst case scenario, and we allow our minds to just spiral. And that anxiety is going to set in, that fear is going to set in. And so we've got to change our thought process. We've got to change our thought patterns and recognize when those things come into our minds and say, oh, wait a minute, where'd that come from? Is it truth from God's Word, or is it a lie from the enemy? Is it a lie from Satan trying to get me off track, trying to throw me off the rails? Because we can let our thoughts take over and we'll go way off the rails. I know I have. And so Paul is asking us to put this into practice. Put this into practice. He knows that the church here is going to need these things. He knows that we're going to need these things. We're going to need these things to survive, to combat the enemy, to put up our guard and recognize when the enemy is trying to attack. And that's when we think on these things. We think about the things that He has done for us. We think about Him, and we begin praying, and our lives will change when we start recognizing where we're being attacked, because He will attack, and He's waiting, and He's lurking, and He's going to prey on our weaknesses. He knows what buttons to push. He knows where to attack and what to do, and it can be just as little as a thought, a tiny thought, and then we're real good at making mountains out of molehills. Going to worst case scenarios, things that have never happened, or things that may happen, may not. But just like we talked about yesterday, God gives us a peace that passes all understanding. He is there with us. Whatever we think may happen, whatever bad can happen. I talked about my brother's motorcycle wreck. I never dreamed that would happen. I guess I thought there was a possibility. But when we were in it, God was in it. He was covering it. He was surrounding us. He was protecting us. He was comforting us. He was strengthening us. He was showing us more of Him. So when those thoughts pop into our minds, we've got to recognize it, that it's not from God, that it's from Satan, and we need to fight back, and we need to stand firm, and we need to stand our ground, and we need to lean and trust upon God and His Word. And He is what is going to fill our minds, fill our hearts with more and more of Him. And He is going to get us through each and every situation we find ourselves in. We're asked to think on these things. Whatever is praiseworthy, whatever is true, think on these things. So I pray that that's something that you can take with you. This is something that I have learned a lot from. God taught me, and he had a lot of work to do. I'm just going to say, he had a lot of work in me to do to get me to where I'm at the point where I can recognize it now. And I'm like, not today. Nope. No, thank you. Because I've got a God that is way more in control than he is. So I hope that that's something you can hang on to. It's something I cling to, that I hang on to, because it was a struggle. It was a struggle. My mind, my thoughts, whatever we're filling our minds with, that's what's going to come out of our mouths. And this is where our focus needs to be. So I pray that you have a great rest of the week, and I'll see you next time. Thanks, guys.